Hi Divya.
Hey Suman, good evening.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Excellent. Should we get into it?
Yeah. Let's get into it. The topic today is the powerful why question.
Excellent.
Maybe I'll just give a quick context. So we all have a bias for action, right? We quickly jump into solutions, what needs to be done, how to do it. But if you pause to ask why, that'll help us to take better, more informed decisions. It helps us understand the objective, align on it when there are multiple stakeholders, especially. We also need to ask this question periodically because things change, especially today. Everything's changing very rapidly, and the original assumptions may not hold any longer.
So I love this, Suman, and I'm going to jump in before Gautam. I hand it over to you. But Suman, I love this, right? The bias for action that you talked about. I think it is so prevalent even in our corporate world today. I want to take a pause to talk about where it came from, right?
Yeah.
In evolutionarily, people who have survived have acted, right? So when we were hunter gatherers and all of it, people that acted when there was a need to act are the ones that kind of survived. And this is something that has therefore been passed on, right? It's very ingrained to act, right? To
Yes.
pause and actually not act, or inaction is goes against the grain, right? So it's actually more effortful than just impulsively acting when you perceive a need to act, right? So I love, and also I think it's a lot to do in the corporate world. If you look at it, it's a lot to do with how you think people will judge you if you do not act, right?
Exactly.
Right, Suman. But one of my favorite examples for this is, and we used to learn it in behavior science classes, is a goalkeeper probably will save more goals if he stays still and does not dive to the left or the right, and if he sticks to the center. But most goalies would rather take that dive because they'll fail doing something and not fail because of inaction. But it's such a lovely statistic to kind of know, right, that probably inaction would have led to better outcomes. So Suman,
That's
I
a
want to
that's an amazing. In fact, that's one of my favorite examples as well. That's really amazing.
absolutely, I think it's very interesting. And so I want to throw it back to you as to how do we therefore, right, how can we stop and not act when everything is telling us to jump and dive right, left or right.
So when we look at before we dive into the solution space, we can spend a lot of time thinking, but the framing of the questions is important. Often, what we do is we tend to focus on the what and the how. Okay, if you look at typical in a company, for instance, a manager asks a lot of how questions, right? How do we hire? How do we scale? How do we meet our deadlines? So they have a lot of how questions. But the founders or the innovators, and that's why they're there, they ask a very different question. They ask why, right? It's a very simple question. It's not a brilliant question. In fact, it's a basic question, but it changes the game because it challenges the status quo. So they did a study, an extensive study of such people who had started companies, innovative companies, right? More than 500 people they looked at as a sample, and they had the top names like Jeff Bezos and Ratan Tata, and it was a 6-year project. What they discovered at the end of it, that they share a few distinct, what they called quote unquote discovery skills. And the most important discovery skill was asking questions. And of all the questions innovators asked, one that was rated as being the most important was the why question. So yeah, so what we are saying is, of course, we need to be careful about our bias for action. But even when we are framing the question, it's important we frame a why question rather than a what and how question.
It's so true. Gautam, before I go, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, actually, suppose it is not so easy to take any action. Like if you are preparing for some exam, like UPSC, and you have put so much of time and so much money, and you simply can't quit that course. Like you are failing 1 or 2 years. So how can we take any decision on that? Yeah.
I think
right?
Gautam, I think when Suman is talking about the why question, right? I think that one might apply in the specific case that you're talking about also. Suman, do you want to take us through some of the scientific basis for the why?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the scientific basis was this, study which I mentioned. But when we come to exams, this is a very interesting thing, right? So let's look at small children, toddlers also. They keep on asking questions, right? Why is the sky blue? Why can he go out and not me? Why is he like this? Why is he fat? I mean, their questions keep on coming at us, right? And they don't care about being politically correct. Also, all the questions start with why, and every answer you give seems to bring up another why question. So we get irritated after a point and finally say, I said so, that's why. Now the point is, all this happens due to high curiosity, and curiosity has been shown to be positively correlated with intelligence. So the question then comes, then why is it as grown up, as adults, we often don't ask the why question? And I think that's a lot to do with just our schooling system, right? Because we learn what is convergent thinking, not divergent thinking. And it's not the fault of the student, it's also the system itself, right? Because the system kind of tells you that there is only one answer. It's in the back of the book. The teacher is only looking for that one answer, and you better know that answer, so you better mug it up and put it out in the exam, right? In the process, we stop asking questions. Sir Ken Robinson put it very aptly in his TED talk, which that TED talk which it went viral. Do schools? It was called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And he says a very interesting thing. He says, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you will never come up with anything original. And we are now running at national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can do. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capabilities. So yeah, so it is natural, but right after schooling, we tend to lose it. And as we grow up, as we get into our working lives, it's important that we start getting that back.
I completely agree. And the number of meetings that start with what should we be doing, right? It is incredible. And even so, Suman, I'm going to agree that even, some of our meetings, right? We go in with trying to fix a problem. And when we go in with trying to fix a problem, you ask what can be done, right? Or you ask,
Yes,
how can we fix this? And you do not ask the why a lot of the time, right? And the
yes,
minute
yes.
we say what can be done, you've gone into this whole thing of replacing an action with another action with another action, right? Rather than getting to the actual why of why should it be done in the first place, and then
Exactly.
going to the therefore what and how from there, right? So it's incredible. I'm if I was to take a hypothesis, I'd say that so many meetings could probably be more productive if you got to the why instead of the what and the how, because my sense is that most of them start with the what and how.
Exactly. Exactly. You're absolutely right. And we have to frame it also properly. Let's say there is something which has been asked from you at work. Now, you can always say, why should I do this? But it doesn't come out right, right? So we have to do it tactfully. So why does this need to be done, right? Then you're saying it's not about me doing it. Why does this need to be done? Or even better, what are we trying to achieve by doing this? So it's a bit of communication also, how we put it across, so the other person doesn't see that we are kind of doesn't perceive it that we are pushing back. But you're essentially asking a very fundamental question of why. Why do we need to do this, and what happens if we don't do it? That's the other side of looking at it, the other way of looking at it, and that's also a very powerful question.
So, Gautam, do you want to jump in? I do have a couple more questions, but you
No, go ahead, Divya. I will jump in the last.
perfect. So, Suman, I think it's one of, as I think about asking the why question, right? Um, I think it's also important who asks the why question. A lot of the time, it becomes unidirectional, right? So you have a leader or you have a manager who's managing a meeting, right, or a task, and
Yeah.
now all the why questions are directed to the manager, and it's not the other way around, right? So I think that's the other one that it just came to me that why questions, it's not just about asking the why, it's also that who asks the why, and it should be both ways, right?
No, I completely agree. It needs to be not unidirectional. It needs to be both ways, right? But we need to be asking that why question, because essentially you're still in the problem space. You've not got into that, that example that I gave about, how do we scale and all of that. But the moment you ask that why question, you're still focused on the problem and trying to understand what the problem really is before you jump into the solution. Yes, so definitely needs to be bi-directional.
Yeah. And what have your experiences been with so in your thing as a coach, Suman, your experiences, how has this practice been hard for companies to kind of activate? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think companies also need to look at the why question, the fundamental question. Why do they exist? Who are they? Why do they exist? Which business are they in? Right? And there are tons of examples of companies which have gone under. The best of companies. You can think of Nokia and Kodak. They were the top of their game, right? The only reason that they kind of perished and they were not able to what should I say, pivot, right, is because they were not asking fundamental questions of why and challenging their own assumptions. But that's at a company level. Even at an individual level, it's extremely important. For instance, I talked a bit about communication, right? So just to build on that, why you need it, right? And these are everyday examples. So I'll give you an example. So when I say, uh, hey, I need this report at my desk latest by 6 p.m., I tell somebody, it can sound a bit bossy. And when we do the feedback, actually, often leaders are surprised that even though they were not intending to be bossy, but they come across as being a bit pushy and bossy. But just imagine the same sentence if they say, because I need, I need this report at my desk latest by 6 p.m., because I need to review it and send a consolidated report to the leadership team by 7 p.m. You're giving the reason why, and that kind of takes the edge out of it. You're not bossy, you're not sounding bossy anymore. You're just telling them why you need it at 6 p.m. And this I learned the hard way. This was a blind spot for me also. The way I used to behave, manage. Somebody told me this, and it kind of hit me like a light bulb. So that's about communication. It also, it's important in other areas as well. You talked about coaching. So in coaching, we do coaching contracts, right? So when we start coaching a person, we say, okay, what is it that we want to focus on? So let's say a client says, I want to have a better relationships with my stakeholders. Or it could be, I need to get better at managing conflicts, whatever be the contract. Now, the tendency is to say, okay, tell me how how do you think you can get better? What have you tried? What has worked for you? What has failed for you? Who do you think does this well? Who are your role models? These are all coaching questions. But before all of that, it's good to ask a very fundamental question. Why is it important for you? If you're saying you want better relationships, why is it important for you? It opens up, the motivation, the drive, the triggers, barriers, all of that of the other person, right? And we are trying to understand the problem better to gain perspective even before going into the solution mode. And I've tried this with I do this with all my clients, and I find it to be an extremely powerful question. Hey, you want to change, but why do you need to change? Why is it important for you? So again, it's a why question.
Gautam, you pressed the request to speak.
Yeah, one of the example Suman put like Nokia, why Nokia didn't pivot in some other direction. So yeah, Suman, can you explain?
Yeah, so again, that's a case study in itself. So I don't know whether I'll be able to do justice.
Yeah, but
But essentially, all these companies have it's the same issue, right? What happens is they get very complacent with their success, and what happens is success is that you want to continue doing that, and the companies which are successful are the ones who are more reluctant to challenge their assumptions and change things, because for one, they might cannibalize their own product, right? Let's say right now the product is high margin product. Now what happens if I bring in another product which has a low margin, right? And industry after industry, it's been the same thing. A Nokia example is also interesting, but it's also about a hardware and a software play. Okay. So let's take the Kodak example. I find that to be one of the most fascinating examples. Kodak actually was born in the late 1880s. Uh, They were at the top of their game. At the peak, they had a 95% market share of film cameras, and that company went under in less than 10 years time. And Kodak during that 100 years was actually a great innovator, so nobody can say they were not innovating. But what happened? I think what happened is, to put it very simply, is that they did not redefine their business. If they had asked a fundamental questions, who are we and what business are we in, right? Why are we doing what we are doing? It would have been a game changer. Again, I'm just making it sound very simplistic. It's not so easy as that, but essentially it's about changing the narratives from saying we are in the film business, yeah, and I'm talking of photographic films, to saying, we are in the memories business. Okay. And the moment you do that, the entire perspective changes, and then you're starting to open up to other industries, other sectors as well. And that is probably one of the reasons why a lot of these companies like Nokia and Kodak got stuck in time.
Yeah. And Suman, we're talking about pauses, we're talking about, asking the why question, but there is a thin line between, when bias for action and, like, even Gautam mentioned, where action is actually required and you're procrastinating or you're paralyzed, right? Um, and this is, it's not often easy to recognize this thin line rather than in hindsight, right? So, with this specifically, what are the ways in which you can diagnose that this is action bias and not procrastination, or not knowing what to do or how to do it? Hello, Suman. Hey, can you hear me?
I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I'm saying definitely action is required. And today, this entire concept of, fail fast and create a minimum viable product is really about, constantly course correcting. So instead of getting the whole thing out the door, you do something which is like a quick and dirty solution. The essential principles of design thinking. You get something out, you create a minimum viable product, get feedback from your customers, and then start changing it, right? And constantly keep innovating. That's the whole mantra. But I think where we get stuck is again the mindset. We are all, often we are in that perfection mindset. I don't want to give something to my coworkers which is half baked, because traditionally I have always been perfect, right? So it again requires a big mindset change in terms of, hey, you don't have to be the best, it doesn't have to be perfect. Get something out, get your feedback, and see if you're on the right track, and then course correct as you get the feedback. Yeah. So definitely action is required, but it needs to be iterative, and we need to have the mindset to constantly innovate and change.
That's very interesting. Thanks. I think that's a nice one. Gautam, yeah. Hey, Pratik, you've jumped in. Do you want to add to?
Hello, everybody. So I was just listening in about since the last 2 3 minutes. I noticed that this is about to end, uh, but I did have a question related to education. Quickly, I do think that the entire concept of going for a 4 year degree in a different city or in a college to get access to the best quality education, I do feel that that concept has become outdated. So if we ask the why question, if I do need, say, access to, if I do want to study computer science, and I do have access to, let's say, lectures from Harvard or MIT or Cornell at my disposal on YouTube. So this is just another thing. I just wanted to bring it onto the table that is the concept of education. If we ask the why question, is it outdated today?
Um, that's a good question, Gautam. The point is that education is one of the slowest things to move. Curriculum changes very, very slowly. But at the same time, we still need our degrees, right? Because it's still linked to hiring, it's linked to the kind of opportunities. So my 2 cents would be, go and grab the best education out there is, but don't go and do it just because somebody else is telling you, or peer pressure. Do what you really enjoy and make sure that you have that constant hunger for learning. I think today we are in a world where our education doesn't end with those 4 years. And it might sound cliches, but it's far from it.